You clicked this video because you're a complete novice when it comes to creating epoxy charcuterie boards. Well, I'm gonna show you on how to create an epoxy charcuterie board that sold so fast, I couldn't even take a finished video of it. All you gotta use is use your favorite epoxy along with some wood scraps. In this case, it's walnut, along with a Crafted Elements silicone mold using 4 basic tools. Stay tuned. So rummage through your scrap pile or create your own self a walnut panel. And what you're going to want to do is place your acrylic template guide down on your workpiece, trace around it, and then you're going to want to use a jigsaw, a table saw if it's a straight line. You could use a bandsaw if you have it, a scroll saw, even a handsaw in this case. Jigsaw is my go-to just because I don't have a bandsaw, and the table saw does not create curved lines very easily. So here I'm just using my Milwaukee jigsaw and cutting the trace line that I just traced out. So this is tool number 1 out of the 4 tools I will be using and that you could be using on your next charcuterie board. The next step is to go ahead and get your acrylic guide and your workpiece and somehow fix the workpiece to the acrylic guide. You could use super glue, hot glue, CA glue. That's my form of easiest way is you put a little bit of 3M tape down, squirt some CA glue, and then use the activator spray and spray the acrylic guide. And then press firmly and then just wait about 5 to 7 seconds and then your workpiece is held on very securely. Now the next tool that you'll need is some sort of router. Here I'm using a router table with a flush trim bit. But what you could do is use a cordless router and a flush trim bit and use a bottom guided bearing flush trim bit if you're using the handheld router. Or if you're using a router table, use a top bearing flush trim bit. So here at the Rockler router table, just flush trimming it all up, making it nice and even with the acrylic guide, just because the acrylic guide is the exact dimensions as the form, and then this will help put the workpiece in the form easy peasy with no gaps. And a safe and clean workshop is always a must, which I definitely need to work on. The next step is to apply some epoxy mold release spray to your Crafted Elements mold. What this does, it creates a protective barrier between the epoxy itself and the silicone mold. Just because the epoxy, it is a chemical, does produce exothermic reactions, and if you don't, you could end up tearing your silicone mold, which you definitely don't want to do. Your next step is to use your favorite brand of epoxy. In my case, I'm a huge advocate for Total Boat. I actually just got onto their affiliate ship not too long ago, so I can't say nothing but good things about Total Boat. The viscosity on all their brands of epoxy is just simply amazing. I rarely ever get bubbles in my epoxy charcuterie boards and epoxy items, so huge advocate for them. If you have any questions, definitely don't feel afraid to holler to me in the comments section. But yeah, can't say anything bad about Total Boat. Now, this is where your third tool comes into play is a drill. You could technically just use a popsicle stick like you see in the background, but the drill definitely ensures that the Total Boat 2-to-1 mixture ratio is perfect and there's no clumps in the epoxy or anything like that. Once the 2-to-1 thickset fathom is all mixed up with the pigment, go ahead and slowly pour the epoxy in the mold. Try to pour very slowly so you introduce less bubbles. But if you notice on the right-hand side, there are a little bit more air bubbles. But with the torch, that is easily poppable. And here's just a close-up video of the epoxy and the way that it has exothermic reaction with the pigment. Now, here it all depends on your climate, the humidity, where it's at, the temperature and all that. But here in Minnesota, the humidity is pretty low on average throughout the year. And for me, it's right around 16 hours that the epoxy becomes thick enough for the swirls to stay. So if you're a novice, you'll realize that when you swirl the epoxy, those swirls never ever stay like the finished photos. So that is the key, is to find the right timing on when the epoxy is thick enough for the swirls to stay. Now this is where you'll notice that the silicone mold release spray shines its brightest just because it's super easy to demold. Anything with a handle is a little bit tricky, but as long as you use a spray, you do not risk untearing the mold itself. Now upon further inspection, I noticed that there's a little bit of lip between the epoxy level and the wood level. Now this is where your fourth tool comes in handy. No, you don't need a drum sander, but you do need a sander of some sort. Now, a drum sander is definitely not a one tool, one finish, way. A drum sander does help bring everything level, but with that, you'll notice that I probably ran this workpiece through 30 times just to make it nice and level. Along with drum sanders, it does produce a lot of heat on the epoxy, and any type of super hot heat on epoxy will bend the epoxy. So be very careful if you run it through a drum sander that you don't overheat the epoxy and let the epoxy bend like on the handle or on the little tips. Now back using your other tool is some sort of router. With the router, I'm using a 1/8 inch roundover bit along with a hose just to suck up all the epoxy shavings that come off of it. You don't need the vacuum, but it is nice. I'm definitely trying to have a cleaner shop, but obviously that has drastically failed. Yeah, as you can see with my catch-all tray on that drum sander. But once you round over that, back to the sanding. This is where a hand sander is nice. I'm using the Rotex 125. No, you don't need a Festool Rotex. No, you don't need Festool at all. I started out with a Ryobi sander after my Black & Decker sander broke. So just hand sand, go up the grits. So I start at 120, then go to 180, then to 220, then to 320, and then to 400. You'll notice that it is a lot of work to sand epoxy. The more work that you put into it, the better that your finished result will be. What I like to do is wet sand along with spraying off each grit of sandpaper and dust, and along with water popping the board itself after every grit. Don't ask me why, that's just my method. So once that's all sanded up to 400, I'm going to use a little bit of water. I do have my sander disconnected from my vacuum so the vacuum doesn't take on water. But go ahead and wet sand your charcuterie board. Wet sanding is the best final finish sanding in my opinion. And then go ahead and spray off all of that epoxy dust one last time. Now, you can choose any sort of food safe finish that you want. My go-to is Total Boat Wood Honey wood finish as well. It lasts a long time. It's easy to reapply if need be, so your customer can reapply it easily. And look at how beautiful the wood honey shines. So I posted these photos on my Instagram story saying, hey, this is for sale. And fun fact, this board sold so fast and it needed to be personalized that I completely forgot recording the personalization stage. But if you're entering in like the charcuterie board or cutting board market, definitely get yourself a laser of some sort. It opens the door up with so many more possibilities. So this is the finished product with the design that my client requested. And I definitely want to say thank you very much there, Eric. And thank you for watching. Have a good day.